Some of you have been trying to understand what God is doing, but baby, let me tell you, sometimes understanding ain't required. Sometimes God will take you down a road with no signs, no map, no GPS, no clue where you're headed, and he'll whisper, "Trust me, see." Trusting beyond knowing means you don't have all the details, but you still move. You don't see the outcome, but you still obey. You don't have the blueprint, but you build anyway, because if you got to know before you trust, that ain't faith, that's comfort. And God didn't call you to be comfortable. He called you to believe beyond what you can see. Somebody shout, "I'm trusting beyond knowing." When we talk about trusting beyond knowing, the very first thing we must come to grips with is this: truth faith begins where understanding ends. That's the tension every believer, every dreamer, every person who's ever walked with God will face. Because we like clarity. We like control. We want the plan laid out before us, the steps numbered, the outcomes guaranteed, the path illuminated. But God, in his infinite wisdom, often chooses to move outside the boundaries of our understanding. He will deliberately lead us into seasons where our intellect cannot comprehend his intent, where our knowledge cannot navigate his purpose, and where all we can do is trust him in the dark. You see, as long as we can explain it, it doesn't require faith. As long as it fits into our logic, it doesn't stretch us. Faith is not needed when things make sense. Faith is required when they don't. That's why the Bible says, "Lean not on your own understanding," because your understanding has limits. It's built on experience, on what you've seen and learned. But God operates in dimensions your mind can't measure. He's not bound by time, circumstance, or reason. So when he asks you to step out, he's not asking you to figure it out. He's asking you to trust it out. Faith begins where understanding ends. That's why Abraham had to leave everything familiar, his country, his kin, his comfort, without a destination. God didn't give him a map, he gave him a word. And that's where faith comes alive, when you have no explanation, only expectation. When you have no evidence, only assurance. When you can't trace his hand, but you trust his heart. Abraham didn't understand, but he moved. Noah didn't understand, but he built. Mary didn't understand, but she believed. Every great act of faith in Scripture began at the edge of understanding. Some of you are standing at that edge right now. You've done everything you can do, thought through every option, prayed every prayer you know how to pray, and still there are no answers. You've been trying to make sense of what God is doing, but he's silent. You've been trying to see how this season connects to his promise, but nothing lines up. That's where faith begins. Faith is not the product of clarity. It's born in confusion. It's the divine ability to keep walking when your sight fails, to keep trusting when your logic breaks down. You may not realize it, but sometimes God hides the why because he's building your will. He withholds the explanation to strengthen your obedience. If you knew everything, if you understood every move, you'd depend on the plan instead of the planner. So he allows uncertainty to drive you deeper into dependence. He removes the visible to awaken the invisible. Faith thrives in mystery. It dies in certainty. If God explained every detail, there would be no room for belief. That's why trusting beyond knowing feels so uncomfortable. It's the death of control. It's surrender, real surrender. Not the kind you sing about, but the kind you live through, the kind that hurts your pride because you can't fix it, can't prove it, can't predict it. It's standing in a storm with no umbrella, but still declaring, "God, I believe you'll bring me through this." It's when the doctor says there's no cure, but you still speak healing. It's when the bank says there's no funds, but you still sow a seed. It's when people walk away and you still walk forward. That's faith beyond understanding. Let me tell you something. Sometimes God will let you lose your plan so you can find His purpose, because His purpose will never fit inside your plan. The disciples thought they understood Jesus' mission and set up a kingdom, overthrow Rome, reign in power. But when He was crucified, all their understanding fell apart. Yet in the ashes of their confusion, the resurrection revealed a greater glory than they could have imagined. What they thought was the end was really the beginning. Faith always leads you to a revelation that reason can't reach. There will be seasons where God intentionally removes your sense of understanding because He's calling you into a deeper level of trust. You'll ask questions and hear no answers. You'll seek clarity and receive silence, but silence is not absence. God is often most active when He appears most still. In those moments, He's testing whether you'll rely on what you know or on who you know. Will you trust the facts or will you trust the Father? Faith begins when you stop demanding explanations and start resting in His character. Think about a child with a parent. The child doesn't need to understand every decision. They just trust their parent's heart. If the parent says, "Hold my hand," the child doesn't analyze where they're going, they just follow. That's the simplicity of faith God is calling us back to. We've complicated trust with too much reasoning. We've intellectualized faith until it's lost its fire. Real faith is raw, risky, and relational. It's saying, "God, I don't understand it, but I'm still with you. I don't see it, but I still believe it." But faith begins where understanding ends. And when you embrace that truth, you begin to see God in ways you never could while leaning on logic. You start realizing that every delay was direction, every disappointment was redirection, and every unanswered question was preparation. You see, God doesn't owe you understanding to fulfill His promises. His word is enough. The same God who spoke light out of darkness can bring clarity out of confusion, but He won't do it until you've learned to trust Him without needing to know. So today, stop trying to make sense of what only faith can see. Stop dissecting what God designed for you to simply believe. Your mind may not understand how the pieces fit, but your spirit knows the one who holds them. Trust Him beyond your knowing, because the miracle isn't in the explanation, it's in the obedience. It's not in what you understand, it's in what you believe anyway. And when you dare to step out on faith without understanding, that's when heaven moves. That's when doors open. That's when peace floods your heart, not because the situation changed, but because you did. Faith begins where understanding ends, and on the other side of that surrender, you'll find out that God was never asking you to figure it out. He was simply inviting you to trust Him more. Obedience is louder than evidence. Those words carry the weight of every faith journey ever walked. Because there comes a moment when you've prayed, you've hoped, you've cried, and yet there's still no visible proof that what you believe will happen. There's no confirmation, no validation, no evidence. And in that moment, the question is not whether you believe, it's whether you'll obey. True faith isn't proven in what you say you believe. It's proven in what you're willing to do when nothing looks like it's working. Obedience is louder than evidence because obedience speaks when your circumstances are silent. It's your yes in the face of no. It's the sound of faith in motion. Anybody can trust God when the outcome is clear, when the numbers add up, when the doors are opening. But obedience shows its power when there's no sign at all that obedience will pay off. That's when your actions echo louder than your understanding. You can say you trust God, but it's obedience that proves it. When God told Noah to build the ark, there was no evidence of rain, no storm clouds in the sky, no sign of floodwaters coming. Just a word from God and a hammer in Noah's hand. Noah's obedience became the evidence. His action spoke before the rain ever fell. That's the kind of faith God honors, the faith that works before it witnesses. When you obey without evidence, you're saying, God, I don't need to see proof to believe your promise. That kind of obedience shakes heaven because it tells God you trust his word more than your world. Obedience will always take you beyond logic. It will make you look foolish to those who only live by sight. Sometimes you'll have to obey in ways that defy your own reasoning. The people around you won't understand why you're still holding on, why you're giving when you're lacking, why you're forgiving someone who hurt you deeply. They won't understand because obedience doesn't answer to understanding. It answers to faith. It's the act of moving when your mind says stay, of speaking when your fear says be quiet, of stepping when the ground hasn't even formed yet. Abraham understood that. God told him to take his son Isaac, his promise, his miracle, and lay him on the altar. There was no evidence that obedience would lead to anything but loss. But Abraham went anyway. Every step up that mountain was louder than any sermon he could preach. His obedience spoke volumes. God, I trust you even when I don't understand you. And when he lifted that knife, heaven spoke back. The provision was already there, but it was released by obedience. Some of what you're waiting on isn't being withheld, it's being unlocked. Obedience is the key that opens what faith believes for. We live in a world obsessed with proof, data, evidence, confirmation. We want to see before we move, no, before we act. Be certain before we step. But that's not how the kingdom works. God calls us to move on revelation, not validation. He'll give you an instruction that makes no earthly sense because he's not trying to test your understanding. He's testing your trust. When he told Peter to cast his net again after catching nothing all night, it wasn't about fish. It was about faith. Peter said, nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net. That nevertheless is obedience without evidence. And when Peter obeyed, the nets overflow. Some of you are one act of obedience away from overflow. You're one yes away from breakthrough, but you're waiting on evidence, waiting to see how it'll work, waiting for everything to line up. God says, move now. You want the sign, but the sign follows obedience. You're asking God to prove it before you do it, but heaven's waiting on you to do it before he proves it. Miracles are released on the other side of obedience. You'll never see the water part until you step into it. Obedience is costly. It's not comfortable. Sometimes it means walking away from people, places, or things that feel safe. It might mean giving when you don't have enough, forgiving when you don't feel ready, trusting when you can't see. But that's how faith grows, through obedience that costs something. The kind of obedience that stretches you beyond convenience and into conviction. It's not the shout that shows your faith. It's the sacrifice. It's the quiet yes in the dark when nobody sees but God. When you obey without evidence, you enter into partnership with God's purpose. You align your will with his will, and that's where power flows. Every time you choose obedience over comfort, heaven takes notice. Because obedience says, I believe God's word more than I believe what I see. Evidence can be deceiving. Circumstances can lie. Feelings can fluctuate, but obedience is anchored in truth, and truth never changes. That's why obedience will always outlast evidence. You might not have the proof, but you have a promise. And that promise is enough to keep walking. Think of the Israelites marching around the walls of Jericho. 6 days they walked in silence, no cracks in the walls, no signs of collapse, no visible progress. But on the 7th day, when they obeyed the instruction to shout, everything shifted. The walls didn't fall because of noise. They fell because of obedience. Every step they took in silence was building pressure in the spirit. That's what obedience does. It builds unseen momentum. What looks like nothing is producing something. God's blessings are often hidden behind simple acts of obedience. The breakthrough isn't always in the big, dramatic moment. It's in the quiet decision to keep doing what God said, even when it looks like it's not working. Keep sowing, keep praying, keep forgiving, keep showing up. You may not see evidence yet, but obedience is already speaking on your behalf. Heaven hears it. Hell fears it, because obedience testifies that your faith is real. And let me tell you, obedience doesn't just move God, it changes you. Every time you obey, your faith muscle strengthens. Every time you choose His will over your own, you grow. You start walking with a different confidence, not in yourself, but in the God who never fails. You stop needing to see proof because you've learned to trust His pattern. You start realizing that obedience is the evidence that you're surrendered, that you're growing, that you believe. So today, even if you don't see any sign, even if it looks like nothing's happening, keep obeying. Build the ark, walk around the wall, cast the net again, keep saying yes, even when you don't have the evidence to justify it. Because obedience will speak for you when words fail. It'll open doors that doubt could never touch. It'll bring blessings that logic could never predict. Obedience is louder than evidence. The world may doubt what you believe, but they can't deny what they see God do through your obedience. When you live that kind of faith that acts before it sees, your life becomes a sermon, your steps become a declaration, and heaven responds to that sound. Delay is not denial, it's divine development. Those words sound simple until you find yourself waiting for the door to open, waiting for the promise to come to pass, waiting for the healing, waiting for the breakthrough you've prayed for. Waiting is one of the hardest tests of faith because it challenges our trust in God's timing. We live in a culture that glorifies instant results. We want quick answers, immediate outcomes, fast solutions. But God doesn't move according to human schedules. He moves according to purpose, and purpose requires process. What feels like delay to you may actually be the classroom of development in disguise. There are moments when God deliberately presses pause, not to punish you, but to prepare you. You think He's forgotten you, but He's forming you. You think He's late. But He's building something in you that can only come through waiting. The delay isn't rejection, it's refinement. It's God working behind the scenes, strengthening your character, deepening your roots, shaping your faith, and ensuring that when the blessing comes, you'll be able to carry it. The truth is, many people pray for elevation, but aren't ready for the weight that elevation brings. They want the platform, but not the pressure. They want the crown, but not the cross. God's delays are His way of preparing you for what you prayed for. Because if He gave it to you too soon, it could destroy you. Sometimes blessing isn't the thing you're waiting for. It's the person you're becoming while you wait. Think about Joseph. God gave him a dream of leadership, of greatness, of influence. But before he ever reached the palace, he went through a pit, a prison, and years of being forgotten. Every season looked like delay, but it was development. God was teaching him how to manage himself before managing others, how to lead with humility before leading with authority. Had Joseph gone from dream to destiny instantly, he wouldn't have had the maturity to handle the responsibility. What looked like delay was really divine preparation. God will often hide you in a season of delay to develop what will sustain you in a season of destiny. He's protecting you from premature exposure, because premature promotion can be dangerous. If you get what you want before you're ready for it, what was meant to bless you can break you. So God lets you wait, not because he's ignoring your prayers, but because he loves you too much to give you something you can't yet sustain. There's a verse in Habakkuk that says, though the vision tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. That means the promise has a divine schedule. It may not arrive on your timeline, but it will arrive right on time according to God's. The delay isn't a denial. It's divine timing unfolding at the pace of your readiness. Sometimes you're waiting for the blessing, but other times the blessing is waiting for you to mature, to heal, to grow into the person who can handle what God is about to release. Delay teaches you things success never could. It teaches you patience, dependence, and in endurance, it humbles your ego and clarifies your motives. When everything is moving slowly, when doors aren't opening, when people overlook you, that's when your faith is tested and your motives are purified. Are you serving God for the promise or for the relationship? Are you chasing blessings or are you chasing the one who blesses? Delay exposes what's real. David understood this. He was anointed as king as a teenager, but it took years before he ever sat on the throne. He went from victory to hiding, from applause to exile. But in those years of waiting, God shaped him into a man after his own heart. The caves and the wilderness developed in David what the palace could not. The delay trained his hands for battle, his heart for worship, and his spirit for leadership. When the time finally came, David wasn't just ready for the throne. He was ready to carry the weight of it. Sometimes the longer the delay, the greater the destiny. God uses waiting seasons to enlarge your capacity. He's stretching your patience, expanding your endurance, and building in you the kind of strength that won't crumble under pressure. You're not being punished, you're being prepared. The delay is developing your ability to handle more. It's like planting a seed. When you put it in the ground, it looks like nothing is happening. Days, weeks, maybe months go by, and still there's no sign of life. But underneath the soil, growth is happening. Roots are forming. Foundation is being built. If the seed were to sprout too early, it would wither because the roots wouldn't be deep enough. The delay is for depth. God is doing something underground in your life right now. It might not be visible, but it's vital. We often interpret delay as a closed door, but sometimes it's a divine detour. God might be keeping you in one place to protect you from what you can't yet see. The door you wanted may have opened into disaster. The relationship you prayed for might have derailed your calling. The opportunity you thought you missed might have been the very thing that would have broken you. So when God says, wait, it's not because he's holding out on you. It's because he's holding you together. Delay also separates those who truly trust God from those who only trust his timing. It's easy to worship when everything's happening quickly, but can you still praise him when nothing's moving? Can you still believe when the waiting feels endless? The greatest faith is not the kind that celebrates fulfilled promises, but the kind that worships through unfinished ones. When you keep showing up, keep believing, keep serving, even when nothing seems to change, you're proving that your faith is rooted in who God is, not what he does. And make no mistake, every delay has an expiration date. Every waiting season has a finish line. God will not let you wait forever. He's not cruel and he's not careless. When the time is right, he will move suddenly. What took years of waiting will shift in moments. The doors that wouldn't open will swing wide. The favor that seemed far off will find you fast. But when it happens, you'll realize that the waiting wasn't wasted. Every tear, every prayer, every delay was a divine setup for the moment when preparation meets promise. So don't despise your waiting season. Don't mistake silence for abandonment. Don't confuse delay with denial. God's delays are filled with purpose. He's not withholding what's good from you. He's making sure that when you get it, you'll be able to keep it. What you call delay, heaven calls development. And one day, when you're standing in the place God promised you, you'll look back and thank him that he didn't let it happen sooner, because you'll see that the waiting made you wiser, stronger, deeper, and more ready than you ever could have been without it. Delay is not denial, it's divine development. Trust the process. The promise still stands. God's silence is still strategy. That sentence alone can shake your soul if you've ever walked through a season where heaven seemed quiet. You prayed and there was no answer. You fasted and the situation didn't change. You cried out to God and all you got back was silence. That silence can feel unbearable, even cruel. It can make you wonder if you did something wrong, if God forgot about you, if the promise you believed for has somehow expired. But what if I told you that God's silence doesn't mean his absence? What if I told you that while you're panicking over what you can't hear, heaven is still working according to a plan? His silence is not punishment, it's strategy. There are times when God intentionally goes quiet, not because he's ignoring you, but because he's orchestrating something beyond your comprehension. Silence is not the absence of activity, it's the concealment of divine movement. When God is silent, he's setting things in motion that your ears couldn't handle and your mind couldn't understand if he told you. The silence is not a sign that he's still deciding. It's a sign that he's already decided and he's working it out behind the scenes. Think of it like this. When a teacher is silent during a test, it's not because the teacher has left the room. It's because it's time for you to apply what you've already been taught. God's silence often comes in the testing seasons. You've heard enough of his word to know what to do. You've seen his faithfulness enough times to trust his character. But now he's quiet because he wants to see if you've matured enough to stand on what you already know. His silence is not neglect, it's nurture. It's his way of saying, I've already prepared you for this, walk it out. The story of Lazarus is one of the clearest examples. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he didn't rush to heal him. He waited, he stayed silent while his friend was dying. To Mary and Martha, that silence felt like abandonment. They believed he could heal, but he didn't show up in time. By the time he arrived, it looked too late. But what they didn't know was that his silence had a purpose. It set the stage for a greater revelation. If he had come when they wanted, they would have known him as a healer. Because he waited, they saw him as the resurrection and the life. His silence was strategy. Sometimes God lets things die so he can show you he's not just a God who fixes problems. He's a God who brings dead things back to life. His silence is not the end of the story. It's the setup for a bigger testimony. While you think nothing is happening, God is building the kind of glory that only comes after silence. We often equate silence with absence because we crave constant reassurance. We want signs, confirmations, prophecies, something to prove God is still there. But God's goal is not to keep you dependent on constant affirmation. He wants to mature your faith so that even when you don't hear his voice, you still trust his hand. Real faith doesn't need constant evidence. It rests on revelation. When you've walked with God long enough, you begin to understand that even in the silence, he's still sovereign. Silence is also God's protection. Sometimes he doesn't tell you what he's doing, because if he did, you'd try to interfere. You'd rush ahead, change the plan, or speak too soon. So he hides the details to protect the outcome. God's silence is his security system. It keeps your miracle from being exposed prematurely. There are blessings being built for you in silence right now. You can't see them, you can't hear them, but they're coming together piece by piece. Heaven's workshop is noisy, but its work is hidden. Another thing about God's silence, it refines your discernment. When you can't hear him, you learn to recognize him in other ways. You start paying attention to small signs, quiet nudges, the still small voice. You begin to see his fingerprints in places you once overlooked. You start realizing that he doesn't just speak in thunder. Sometimes he whispers through peace, through timing, through closed doors. Silence trains your spirit to listen deeper, to look beyond noise, to sense his presence in the stillness. Job knew what it was to live through silence. He cried out in pain, begged for answers, and heard nothing. For a long time, heaven said nothing while his world collapsed. But that silence wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. God was allowing a heavenly conversation to unfold that Job knew nothing about. His silence wasn't God ignoring him, it was God setting the stage for restoration. When God finally spoke, he didn't just explain the suffering, he revealed his majesty. Job's understanding of God deepened through the silence. You may be in a place right now where you feel forgotten, but let me remind you, the teacher is always quietest during the test. You don't have to hear him to trust that he's near. God's silence doesn't mean he's gone. It means he's working in ways that require stillness. Some strategies are too sensitive to be spoken aloud. Some breakthroughs are too fragile to be announced prematurely. So he goes silent, not to hurt you, but to help you hold on until the time is right. When heaven is quiet, hell gets loud. The enemy will use silence to plant lies. He'll whisper, if God loved you, he'd answer. If he cared, he'd move. But don't let the noise of doubt drown out the truth you already know. The same God who spoke to you before the silence is still speaking through it. You just have to shift how you listen. His silence doesn't mean he stopped working. It means he's working differently. Remember, even in Jesus' life, there were silent seasons. Between the age of 12 and 30, the scriptures say nothing about him. 18 years of silence before the public ministry began, but that silence wasn't wasted, it was preparation. Those silent years produced strength, wisdom, and maturity. When he finally spoke, his words carried the power of years spent listening. Don't despise the quiet seasons. They're forming your authority. Sometimes silence is also God's strategy for revealing hearts. When you can't hear him, how do you respond? Do you stay faithful or do you flee? Do you keep worshiping or do you withdraw? Silence exposes whether you're following God for who he is or for what he says. If your worship stops when heaven goes quiet, it means your faith was built on feelings, not foundation. But if you can still lift your hands when the heavens seem closed, that's when heaven starts opening again. So if you're walking through divine silence right now, don't lose heart. You're not forgotten. You're being formed. God's silence is not a pause in his plan. It's a part of it. He's teaching you to trust without talking, to believe without hearing, to rest without knowing. And when the silence breaks, and it will, you'll realize that God never stopped moving. Every unanswered prayer, every quiet night, every moment of confusion was working together to align your life with His will. God's silence is still strategy. It's His way of moving pieces you can't see, preparing outcome you couldn't predict, and strengthening your faith in ways you couldn't imagine. So stay still, stay faithful, stay ready, because when heaven finally speaks, everything that's been silent will suddenly make sense. Trust is the bridge between confusion and completion. That sentence sounds poetic, but it's also painfully practical. Because there will come a time in your life when everything you believed seems to fall apart, when the plan you made doesn't match the path you're on, when what God promised feels far away, when you're standing in the middle of something that makes no sense at all. That space, that gap between what you know and what you see, between what God said and what's actually happening, that's where confusion lives. And the only thing that can carry you through that place is trust. Trust is not blind ignorance. It's not pretending the pain isn't real. It's choosing to believe in the goodness of God even when life feels anything but good. It's saying, I don't know how this will work out, but I believe you do. It's building a bridge with faith over the raging waters of uncertainty. Every step across that bridge feels shaky, but trust keeps you moving when understanding can't. Confusion is inevitable on the journey of faith because God's ways are not our ways. He doesn't operate by our logic or our timelines. He gives glimpses of the destination, but not always the directions. He'll show you the promise, but leave out the process. He'll speak a word that stirs your heart, then lead you into a season that contradicts what He said. That's the moment when you either retreat into doubt or cross the bridge of trust. Trust is what keeps you walking when nothing makes sense. Abraham faced that kind of confusion. God told him he would be the father of many nations, yet years passed without a child. Every month that went by must have felt like a slap in the face of the promise. Then finally, the son of promise was born, Isaac, and just when it seemed like everything was finally making sense, God said, offer him as a sacrifice. How do you reconcile that? How do you obey a command that contradicts the very promise God gave you? The only answer is trust. Abraham didn't understand, but he trusted that God's character hadn't changed. And because he trusted, he discovered something that only trust reveals. God always has a ram in the bush. Trust doesn't erase confusion, it overcomes it. It says, even though I don't see the full picture, I trust the one who painted it. Sometimes God allows confusion to test whether you love clarity more than you love Him. Will you still follow when the map disappears? Will you still worship when the miracle hasn't arrived? Will you still walk when the path isn't clear? Those are the moments that define your faith, not when you're celebrating victory, but when you're standing in uncertainty with your heart still surrendered. We often pray for completion. We want things to come full circle, to make sense, to feel finished. But God rarely reveals the end from the beginning in one step. He moves you through stages that seem disconnected until the moment He pulls them together. What feels like random confusion to you is actually divine construction. You're not lost, you're being led. You're not forgotten, you're being formed. And the bridge that gets you from where you are to where you're meant to be is trust. Think of Joseph again. He had a dream that one day his family would bow before him, a dream of greatness and leadership. But soon after, he was betrayed. sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. If anyone had reason to be confused, it was Joseph. How could a dream from God lead to this kind of pain? Yet Joseph never lost trust in the Lord, even in the prison. He served faithfully. Even in betrayal, he kept his integrity. What he didn't know was that every painful step was leading him toward the promise. The pit, the prison, the false accusation, each piece of confusion was part of the strategy that would place him in the palace. When it was all said and done, Joseph could look back and say, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." That's the revelation that comes when you cross the bridge of trust. Trust transforms confusion into preparation. It teaches you to hold on when your emotions want to let go. It matures your faith. It shifts your focus from why is this happening to what is God forming in me through this. You begin to realize that every delay, every detour, every disappointment was shaping something deeper inside you. Trust doesn't always bring quick answers, but it brings steady peace. Because once you know who's holding the other side of the bridge, you stop worrying about how far the gap is. Even Jesus had to trust through confusion. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed, "Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me." That was the moment of human confusion colliding with divine purpose. There was no sin in his question, just the weight of uncertainty. But what bridged that confusion to completion was trust. "Nevertheless, not my will but yours be done." That's the heart of trust, not the absence of fear, but the decision to obey in spite of it. And because Jesus trusted the Father, what looked like defeat on Friday became victory on Sunday. Some of you are standing in your own garden right now. You're asking God why it had to happen this way, why it hurts so much, why it hasn't changed yet. You're standing between confusion and completion, and the bridge in front of you feels shaky, but trust is the only way forward. You may not understand the why, but you can hold on to the ooh. Trust doesn't mean you don't question. It means you don't quit. It's choosing to believe that even when you can't trace God's hand, you can trust his heart. Trust also requires surrender. It means releasing your need to control every outcome. It means saying, "God, I don't have to understand to obey," because the truth is sometimes completion only comes after you stop fighting the process. You can't receive peace if you're still wrestling with control. The moment you let go and let God take the lead, that's when the bridge strengthens beneath your feet. And here's the beauty of it. Once you cross that bridge, once you reach the other side and look back, what once confused you will suddenly make sense. You'll see that delays built endurance, the detours protected you, and the heartbreaks refined you. What once looked like chaos was actually choreography. God was writing a story far bigger than your confusion could comprehend. Trust is the bridge between confusion and completion because it connects your limited understanding to God's unlimited wisdom. It's the bridge that carries you from heartbreak to healing, from questioning to clarity, from pain to purpose. Without trust, you'll get stuck in confusion, trapped by what you don't understand. But with trust, you keep moving step by step until you see the beauty of what God was building all along. So today, if you're standing in the middle of confusion, don't give up. The bridge may sway, but it won't break. Keep walking, keep believing, keep trusting, because on the other side of that confusion is completion. God's completion, perfect and on time. And when you get there, you'll realize that the bridge you built with trust was the very thing that carried you into your destiny. Family, if there's one thing I've learned in this walk with God, It's that faith is not built in comfort. It's forged in confusion. You don't grow when everything makes sense. You grow when all you've got left is trust, because trusting beyond knowing means standing still when your mind is racing. It means walking when you can't see the road. It means believing when the evidence says give up. And sometimes all you can do is whisper through your tears, Lord, I still trust you. Faith begins where understanding ends. That's where your real journey starts, when you stop needing to know and start daring to believe. When you can say, even though I don't understand it, I'll still follow you. Because obedience is louder than evidence. It's louder than doubt, louder than fear, louder than delay. Every time you obey, you declare, my faith speaks louder than my feelings. And yes, there will be seasons of delay. Long nights when it looks like nothing is happening. But delay is not denial, it's divine development. God is not ignoring you. He's preparing you. He's stretching you, shaping you, strengthening you, so that when the blessing comes, you'll have the character to keep it. He's teaching you that his timing is not late, it's layered. Then there's the silence. Oh, those silent seasons when heaven closes its mouth but not its hand, when God stops speaking but he's still strategizing. His silence is still strategy. He's moving pieces you can't see, fighting battles you don't know exist, and arranging outcomes that will blow your mind. So don't mistake his quiet for his absence. He's right there, working all things together for your good. And finally, when you find yourself in that place where confusion surrounds you, where what you thought you knew no longer makes sense, remember this: trust is the bridge between confusion and completion. It's what carries you across the unknown. It's what keeps you moving when everything else says stop. Trust is your lifeline. Trust is your anchor. Trust is your bridge. Somebody here tonight is standing on that bridge right now. You're between what God promised and what you're living through. You don't know how you're going to make it, but I came to tell you, keep trusting. Don't look down. Don't turn back. Don't let go, because the same God who started this journey with you will see you through to the other side. Faith begins where understanding ends. Obedience is louder than evidence. Delay is not denial. God's silence is still strategy. And trust, trust is the bridge that will take you from confusion to completion. So if you can't see it, trust him. If you can't feel it, trust him. If you can't understand it, trust him. Because trusting beyond knowing is not about seeing the plan. It's about knowing the planner. And when it's all said and done, when the storm settles, when the night breaks, when the pieces finally come together, you'll look back and say, now I see it, Lord. You were working all along. I didn't know it then, but I trusted you and you brought me through. So keep walking, keep believing, keep trusting beyond knowing, because the promise still stands, the purpose is still alive, and the best is still ahead.